All right, you guys, Safia Quinn, the investor professor. I can't even talk today. But I am addressing another comment that was excellent and that will definitely help you build more clarity. The comment was around why do we need a central bank, or why do we have a treasury and a central bank? So it was framed around something like that. Like what's the point of having both of them, right? So I responded that they are two different things, right? But that I would make a longer video. So if you know who you are, shout out to you. That was an excellent question. So overall, we'll get into the specifics, but overall, the Fed, right? We talked about the Fed. There's a video about the Federal Reserve. Please go watch it. We talked about the Fed is the central bank, okay? And they control the monetary policy and money supply. So let that sit in. They control the monetary policy and the money supply. Because remember, we talked about the Feds and their little, we'll maybe say their little teasers on the interest rates and inflation, and how they already have an idea about what inflation level and what interest rate is going to yield the government the best possible returns. Because we talked about inflation being baked into our American economic system, okay? So the federal bank, they control monetary policies. So they're the ones that tell you, you know, what you can't do this, you can't do that, and that's monetary illegal, that's not. They are the ones that tell you that. They control the money supply, meaning if there's too much money out there, what are they gonna do? Raise inflation and raise interest rates, because they want to pull the money back in. If you spending happy, that puts a strain on the supply chain, right? Because you are consumer monsters. And if you got any money, you gonna go spend it. So they are the ones doing that push and pull. And not just you, the investors as well, right? They're the one doing that. Now the Treasury, treasurydirect.gov, right? The Treasury manages the government's finance. They manages the government's existing finance. So you can kind of think about it as the central bank is, maybe we'll say, has their hand on the dial in terms of how much money is flooding back into the government, and the Treasury is managing the government's finances. They are also managing taxes, and they are also managing debt. And that's why they are able to issue you bonds and have you get returns on your money, because they are actively managing your money. The Feds can't issue you bonds because they are playing an analytical game with the economy. A very impressive one. Please, I'm not downsizing the thousands of people who work there, the intelligent economic minds that, I'm not shortchanging them. But they are in the future business. They are in the business of controlling our future spendings, our interest rates, and pulling things. They're the puppet masters, okay? And the puppet is the Treasury. The Treasury actually manages the money. They're the ones that collect it. They're the ones who have the taxes, and they're the ones that pay the debt. So they're the ones to able to say, oh, we can offer you this interest and that interest, because they are the ones that actually have the money, okay? Let's dive a little deeper. So their primary roles. So the Federal Reserve, which is our central bank, like we talked about, controls the monetary policy. The Department of Treasury manages the government's finances. So it's kind of like, maybe think about it like a husband and wife, okay? The Federal Reserve is the husband who's going out to get the money, okay? And the wife is the Department of Treasury who's managing the finances when the money comes in the home, okay? I mean, a little archaic, but that's the short example. So the main focus, right? The Federal Reserve's main focus is stabilizing the economy, okay? By controlling the supply of interest rates and the supply of money. The Department of Treasury, they are managing the Federal Reserve's expenses and issuing government bonds, which is treasurydirect.gov, okay? Who controls it? This is I think one of the main and most important differences is that the Federal Reserve is an independent entity. They are not controlled by the government. They are an independent entity, which, if we want to go down our conspiracy theory route, there's a lot of conspiracies about that, but they are an independent entity. The Department of Treasury is a part of the executive branch under the U.S. president, whoever the U.S. president might be. Okay. The key responsibilities, right, is that the Federal Reserve, they will set those interest rates, the interest rates that we buy homes from, get loans from. They are in charge of setting those interest rates. The Department of Treasury collects taxes, which the IRS, right? That's the tax collecting entity under the Department of Treasury. The Federal Reserve controls the supply of money. The Department of Treasury prints and issues currency, right? So they're controlling it, and the Department of Treasury is printing money. That's why people ask, how come they just can't, my children, how come they just can't print more money? Well, they can't print more money until they have an understanding from the Federal Reserve about how much money is coming in. They can't flood the market because that is going to destabilize the economy. They kind of work hands in hand, okay? The Federal Reserve, they control inflation and employment. That's why another thing, when we talked about the unemployment rate, that's coming from analytics from the Federal Reserve. Then the Department of Treasury pays our bills and debt. We talked about, right, that high inflation makes the American debt easier to pay because it cheapens our American dollar. Well, who's cutting the check? The Department of Treasury, okay? And lastly, that the Federal Reserve buys and sells assets to stabilize the market. If anyone asks a question, we can dive into what assets the Federal Reserve would purchase. And the Department of Treasury pays our federal programs, our military, and our Social Security. Just to highlight with everything going on with Elon Musk and, Trumpito, they have their fingers in the Department of Treasury, right? Because they can't get to the Federal Reserve. That is a separate entity. So they are looking all through the Department of Treasury, looking for waste and doing other things, right? But don't let that dissuade you from actually purchasing bonds and investing, because what they are doing is not hurting the investor. Now let that sit, okay? You guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.